How is it that you can identify, Patrick, whether an organization is resilient or not?
When you look at organizations that have proven themselves to be resilient, they generally are organizations that have made it through one, two, three, four, maybe, any number of changes, right? To me, you don't really know how resilient you are until you end up with something where you need to prove, whether it's something, like we all experienced, right, with the change that happened as a result of the COVID. And when I know an organization is resilient is when they have proven that they can manage through something that's a difficulty, right? Could be a global difficulty, could be a local difficulty. And normally that resilience comes from a little bit of ability to reflect and some ability to plan. Generally, to me, resilience is about being thoughtful and planning for the future, multiple futures, right? Where things can, maybe, or are going wrong.
You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Llopis. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Personalization Outbreak Podcast. I'm sure you would agree that we oftentimes obsess over the external factors that can impact our business. But how about if I told you that in reality, it's the internal factors that make the difference between success and failure? In fact, the structural components used to operate your business will do more to drive positive outcomes and help you manage risks and threats than most other business decisions or actions you take. You see, I'm not taking any credit for that quote. This thought-provoking statement was written by our guest, Patrick Esposito. Patrick is president of Acme General Corp and also serves as counsel with Spillman, Thomas, and Battle Law Firm. See, he's the author of the book, The Structure of Success, a framework to help build your business better. Now, in this book, Patrick shares his own experiences, but also delves into the insights from a survey he conducted with leaders across multiple industries. And today, he's going to share with us and help us examine the 8 core categories that impact an organization's ability to thrive. So before we get started, please click the like button below, share it with your colleagues, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and social media at Glenn Llopis. Patrick, welcome to the show. Thank you so much. I know we've been waiting for this day, so appreciate your time.
Indeed, Glenn, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
No, you're very, very welcome. And, look, we're living at a time right now of a lot of unknowns, but yet we can also see this as the most opportunistic time in modern history. And I kind of get a sense that you see that too, because when it comes to structures, or what I would call standardization, we have a very interesting way of approaching the things that we already know without recognizing that the things that we know might actually be getting in the way of our success. So as I was reviewing your book, which I highly recommend, you really provide some very practical and sound advice that not only helps us think about the way we structure our businesses, but even our lives. So as I think about the world we're living in right now, resilience is a hot topic. Now, given your deep understanding of organizational structures, how is it that you can identify, Patrick, whether an organization is resilient or not?
Right. So, Glenn, to your point, it's actually interesting, right? When you look at organizations that have proven themselves to be resilient, they generally, right, are organizations that have made it through one, two, three, four, maybe any number of changes, right? And changes that weren't necessarily forced upon them, but changes that required some thought from the leadership team, from the from the organization, all of its personnel around where that organization needed to be going. So to me, you don't really know how resilient you are until you end up with something where you need to prove, whether it's something, like we all experienced, right, with the change that happened as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it's if you've been in business for a little while longer, the Great Recession, whether it's now, right, with interest rates that have climbed at the same time as inflation has gone up, and general asset prices have continued to rise, right? So obviously, as you said, a lot of change. And when I know an organization is resilient is when they have proven that they can manage through something that's a difficulty, right? Could be a global difficulty, could be a local difficulty, right? Could be a weather related impact, right? But when you show that you can make it through something, you've shown the ability to be resilient. And when you look at resilience, right, and each of us as humans, right, we may or may not, hopefully we may, right, be resilient creatures ourselves. And normally that resilience comes from a little bit of ability to reflect and
Yep.
some ability to plan, right, for outcomes, and for changes that we may face, right? So, generally to me, resilience is about being thoughtful and planning for the future, multiple futures, right, where things can maybe or are going wrong.
Well, the reason that this question is of importance to me is I've come to learn that resilience just isn't about bouncing back.
Mhm.
It's actually bouncing back at the highest levels of integrity. And why do I add that last part in there? Because we can bounce back, but it's interesting. If we've had to bounce back two, three, four, five, 10 times,
That's right.
is that an indication of the market, or maybe an indication that we weren't resilient enough to find any that our bounce back strategy would be sustainable enough? So I just ask you that because do you always see, especially in the research that you've done with your book, and maybe it doesn't
Right.
get into this depth, um, but do you think that we're always doing what's right? Are we just putting band-aids on things?
So to your point, that's a great question, right? And those who band-aid, I will say, generally end up with businesses that, ultimately are unlikely to be resilient, right? So, to the point you were making about the research related to the book, the research occurred because a lot of what I saw, both as a business leader and working as an advisor or legal counsel to, over the years, probably about 100 or so executive teams. So I decided to take some of the anecdotal evidence that I had some theories around and understand from other expert business leaders, right? Other folks who've successfully led businesses who are recognized as expert in their field. Talk to, about 100 of those folks and ask them what had they experienced that were the reasons why, if they had difficulties in business or if their businesses failed, what were the themes, right? Same thing for success. What were the themes? And there were really these 8 factors, right, that generally showed up when we were looking at what caused businesses to succeed or fail. And to the point around resilience, right? Most of the folks who were successful business leaders that I surveyed had seen their businesses go through one, two, three, or more significant changes, right? So that was not a minor tweak. That was significant changes, right? A massive shift from services to products, a major change on mixes, a change on market segments. To your point about resilience, you need to be listening, right, to what your clients say, what your team says, what the people who you hope become your clients say. Because if you take that data in, you can usually find a good pathway for that business, even if that changes a year, 2 years, 5 years, right? And so, to the point you're making, resilience is about, you know, a long-term timeline in many cases. And by long-term, let's face it, we live in a society where everything is faster, right? So long-term for a business these days, that may be 5 years, that may be 10 years, that may not be a lifetime. But resilience and success tend to be driven by the ability to navigate to things that are different than you thought they were at the beginning, right? And sometimes it's about the direction, and sometimes it's about your team, right?
Well, this kind of takes me to this next question, right? You believe that that organizations should be focused more on um, the inside out versus the outside. In other words, focusing more on internal versus external factors to maximize business impact and growth. Why is that the case, Patrick?
So, when I first started, the very first startup I had, right, I was very focused on finding the right market opportunity, right? And as I went down that path, this was 2000, late 2001 or early 2002. So, holiday season, actually 2001, launching into 2002, and was very focused on the market, right? What was the external opportunity that was going to allow for the building of a great business? And what I came to realize when the first direction proved to be wrong, and the second direction proved to be wrong, and the third direction proved to be wrong, that as I was bootstrapping this along with services revenue, we were building a team. And ultimately, that team is how we arrived at the right direction for that startup, right? Which, we went from being an organization that was focused on environmental commodity management software, which now you're thinking, oh, great space, right? People are concerned about that. Yeah, they weren't in 2002, right? They are now, they're not then. So that was not a great market to pursue. Then made a couple of significant shifts. And what I saw, to your point, was what was going to bring resilience in that business was listening to the market tell us what not to do, listening to the team about what we could do, and then testing those assumptions as quickly as we could to figure out where the opportunities were. And then eventually we got to a point where we started making minor adjustments, not full-blown pivots.
So why is it that we don't spend enough time understanding capacities and opportunities on the inside, and maybe spend too much time thinking about what outside factors tell us that we should do?
Well, I look at it this way, right? We're as individuals, we're often looking for how do we have a quick fix, right? How do we lose weight? How do we end up getting in better shape? How do we do these things that are generally somewhat about external factors, but ultimately inside of us, right? A lot of times we don't look at the changes we need to make. We look at what can I get off the shelf to help me, right? And the reality is we often do that as business leaders too, right? We look at what book can give me the formula for success, not how do I take a framework and then turn that internally to myself and my team, reflect, and be thoughtful about the information I have to predict where we need to go. So I think, look, there's a lot of life where we often look for an easier path, right? And I'm not saying choose the hard path. I'm saying look at the information you and your team have access to and use that to be a guide and build in that time for reflection, right? The same way we need to stay as well-tuned machines, right? As humans, we need to work out. We need to consume, a good diet, right? We need to do the same thing with our business. And because we're often so busy trying to generate revenue doing the same thing we were doing before and deliver right on those contracts or orders, we often don't have enough time to really think through and fully reflect on where we ought to be going based upon the inbound signals that we have.
Well, you just did a nice job of articulating why we get so stuck in standardization and not as focused as we should be on what matters to the individual, in this case, personalization. And so I really give you a lot of credit because, we have this tendency, Patrick, as you know, to benchmark the heck out of everything. When in the end, it's not that information's not important, but those things don't always translate to our own people. Right. And what are people capable of doing to contributing to our goals based upon our mission, our strategies, where we want to go. And thus we may use benchmarking in a less efficient and effective way that may throw us off course, which takes me back to the surveys for a moment. What were some of the things that you picked up? Maybe wasn't directly said to you, or maybe it was a slight nuance of what leaders are truly thinking about, but do not dare to address enough.
So to your point, right? And the 8 factors, and I'll just kind of toss them out, right? That seem to guide um the success or failure of businesses were having a good governance team and good governance operations, having a management team and good management operations, having a process to look at adjustments and pivots, which we've spent a lot of time talking about, having a method to look at investment around growth and infrastructure development, right? If you're going to grow a business, you need to sustain it. We also, found that, a way to manage business disputes and breakups so that if partners didn't agree, it did not become a war, right? Where there was blood and ultimately the killing of a business. Having a way to look at acquisition opportunities, inbound or otherwise, right? Mergers, those types of things. And then the last 2 things are the things that most people don't want to talk about, right? It's disasters and succession planning. And, we tend to almost hide, right, from the bad things that can happen. We wake up in the middle of the night thinking about them, right? But those are the 2 things we don't want to really generally have these candid conversations, whether it is with ourselves, with our team, with our families, right? We don't like to think about that future when we are not there, or when, a, some of our team is not there, or some of our clients aren't there. And, it is human nature to want to think about good things. Um, we generally don't like to talk about the things that aren't great, right? And again, with succession planning, part of the reason we ignore it to our detriment is that we think generally not being in the business is probably bad, right? I'm driving this thing as an executive leader. I want to make sure it succeeds. It is as much about the business as it is about what I'm doing. Well, hey, guess what? At the end of the day, if we build it right, we're all replaceable. And at some point, assuming the business is resilient, you're going to want to be replaced, right? You're going to want to retire. You're going to want to move on to other things. So, I tend to work with folks a lot on the concept of unifying long-term and emergency succession plans so that you don't just think about, if I or some of my leadership team aren't here tomorrow, who needs to step in tomorrow, but thinking about the right way to build for 5 years, 10 years, even longer, by bringing those folks who have talent and capabilities in and helping to provide them with the knowledge that you have and that you needed to grow, right? So those are the 2 biggest things that folks ignore, and to your point, often to their detriment.
So let's go back to the 8 categories.
Yeah.
In fact, let's jump into governance models and governance team composition. I mean, do you think that governance today is something that should be done from a handful of key senior leaders, or is there a different type of governance that can be more of a shared governance platform? What are your thoughts?
So, look, to your point around personalization, right? It depends on your business. It depends on your team, right? And so I tend to look at, a lot of people think of governance being for large corporations, right? With these boardrooms and that kind of thing. The reality is governance to me is the, sort of strategy level of organizational management, and management is really the operational level, right? And so, whether you are a sole proprietor, single member LLC type of person driving this business largely on your own with another, with a team around you, you need other voices, right? If it's you and a partner, probably even more, you need another voice at the table, right? Because 2 people tend to either agree or disagree. And sometimes you need a third voice to make sure that you don't have too much groupthink or too much, bad, beating of your heads together because you just don't agree on something. So I like to look at governance as being the right way to do it. May or may not be that everybody in that conversation has a right to vote, right? It may be the case that you basically have a board of advisors who help you to have some of these reflective moments, interpret data, provide outside views. And, look, the composition, whether you have a formal board of directors, a board of advisors, or just, a family and friends council, tends to be driven by what are your strengths and what do you need to supplement those strengths, right? Because, to your point around a personalization outbreak, it is truly something that I think a lot of people look for. What should my governance team look like? What should my management team look like? But they don't think about what they and their partners look like in that context, their strengths, their weaknesses, the things you ignore, the things you don't like to talk about, and get those other elements of a business represented in both the governance and the management team discussions.
So on that note, Patrick, do you believe are some of the fundamentals of leadership that have changed, and why should we be concerned?
So I would say the reason for concern would be if you haven't realized that things have changed, right? So, it used to be leadership by fiat, right? A leader would say, this is where we're going. Everybody get in line and run that direction, right? Good leaders today, and you can see this if you're around them, right? You're in meetings and they make sure to ask when decisions are going to be made, ask for input. And when input isn't being sourced from, all parts of the room, to ask specific questions of folks who have insights they know need to be surfaced, right? Because the days of, governance by fiat are gone, right? Everything is more consensus driven and ought to be. And at the end of the day, that makes for more informed leaders. So I think when I look at the changes in leadership, right, every leader is going to have their own style. But the thing that I think is most important as far as what change has occurred is that leaders need to be very, one, focused on asking questions, and two, asking thoughtful questions to make sure that better decisions are made.
So as we wrap it up here, Patrick, let's talk a little bit about trust. I mean, clearly, and you talk about this in your book about the importance of partnerships.
Yep.
But what gets in the way of a trusted partnership?
Yep. So, it's interesting. Things that get in the way of trusted partnerships, right? There's the lawyer in me says things that get in the way are not having a well-formed legal structure around how you manage that LLC or that limited partnership or that corporate entity. The non-lawyer part of me says one of the most difficult things, and this is true of any, whether it's two partners, three partners, what have you, it's the same thing that's true in any other type of relationship, right? Where not everybody is going to put in the same amount of hours. Not everybody is going to, be capable of delivering the same type of results. And so an acknowledgement that there is value in differences, right? And so when I say that, it doesn't just mean somebody may work, 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and another person, the way they work, maybe 40 to 50, right? And being respectful of that somebody working 40 to 50 can generate just as much as somebody who's working longer hours, in some case more, because maybe they're not as sleep deprived. I think one, being respectful of the differences, but the second piece, and this is actually something that I've only recently started to think of it in the sort of senior leader context, right? I normally think of it in a team context. So, I read an article where Marissa Mayer, who was, Google exec and ran Yahoo, was quoted as saying that the number one thing she believed hurt businesses was resentment. And I thought, that's kind of a strange thing, resentment, right? And so I read more deeply to understand what that meant. And what she meant was, there's a lot of things that make you upset, whether you're a leader, whether you're on the team, right? Where usually it comes down to there's something that is being taken away from you, that your work is taking away from you that you want. And so one of the things that she adopted, which I thought was a great great idea, and I've adopted in every business since then, which is, what is the one thing you want to try to protect from encroachment in a business, right? Because at the end of the day, if you can protect one thing and you have this candid conversation, we're going to try to protect one thing, you will end up honestly feeling like there's a better partnership, right? And so, I ask this question to people sometimes and they say, I have no idea, right? And it changes, right? Like the number one thing that I realized after a while that was undermining a lot of my business relationships 10 years ago was everybody wanted to schedule these calls early in the morning, which unfortunately coincided with school drop off for my kids. So I'm on a phone talking about something stressful at work. I can't get my kids off to school in a way that, positively impacts their day because I'm on the phone. And I realized that for the days I was doing drop off, I just needed to block that time, right? And so as soon as they were out of the car, I could jump on a call. But while they were in the car during that limited portion of time, it was creating too much negative energy for them, right? And too much negative energy for me with regard to business partners. So I just decided I needed to stop that. And at the end of the day, that, little bit of 15-minute inconvenience for, some of the folks I was working with on businesses, they got it. And that helped me a lot, I think, to develop better working relationships. So anyway, long story short, how do you work better? You work better by having good legal documents and by thinking through candid conversations about how to interact with each other.
You know what I'm taking away from this is that every part of our lives, every part of our businesses, are all defined by a structure. Yep. And it's our decision to define for ourselves which structures are important and which ones are necessary. Because until you know what works best for you, you just can't take somebody else's playbook and adopt it yourself. Yep. Whether that's what you do externally and how the market reacts to your business or what you do internally. And in the end, it's all about what? How do you get the best out of the processes that you have so that you could be transparent with your partners and customers so that we're all solving everybody's needs and wants while looking down further and anticipate what might be coming before circumstances force their hand. And with the right structures and systems and the right people around us, we can get there. How'd I do there, Patrick?
Excellent. And to your point, look, when we talked a little bit prior to the show here, to me, it was, what am I attempting to provide? Structures that can be personalized. What are you the guru of, right? It's the fact that everything needs to be personalized, right? And so at the end of the day, if you're going to be a successful leader of a business, you have to have some framework that should have some standardization, whether it's the framework that I've found to be helpful or other frameworks. The key is how you deploy them, right? Because at the end of the day, it's that personalization that's really going to lead to the success.
Patrick, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know this one has been on the books, as I said earlier, and I'm glad that we had a chance to share your wisdom and insights, and all the best to you and your book. Again, go pick one up on Amazon today. What's it called?
The Structure
of Success, a framework to help build your business better. Always try to make sure that our audience is paying attention. The Structure of Success, a framework to help build your business better. Patrick, thanks so much for your time, okay? Let's make sure to stay in touch.
Glenn, thanks so much.
Now, as we end every show, when you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't. Do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. See you next time. Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Llopis. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.